This video is going to be a bit different to what I normally do because I am very, very upset and annoyed with the current state of affairs. There is a significant mental health crisis happening in the police right now and in emergency services and in the ambulance service, and no one seems to give a shit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through some different statistics. I'm going to just have a little rant on here. If you want to sit and watch, that's fine. If you just want to have me in your headphones and put me on the side, that's also fine. But I'm just going to rant. And by all means, you can listen. You can comment below saying whether you think I'm full of crap or whether you completely wholeheartedly agree with what I'm saying. But either way, I'm going to rant away because frankly, this affects all of us. It affects everybody watching this video. If we don't have police, then we don't have safety. If we don't have the NHS or we don't have an ambulance service, we don't have healthcare. If we don't have the fire service, then who's going to rescue the cats from up the tree? I'm joking, obviously. But who's going to look after us? You know what I mean? So if we don't have the prison service, what the fuck do we do with criminals? Oh, you committed a murder. Oh, all right, you know, off you go, okay. What we're going to do? If the government is allowing the people who are an integral part of taking care of society and taking care of the people in society, if the government are letting them crumble and fail, then the entire fabric of society basically crumbles. So I'm just going to talk about it. Some mental health statistics. The Police Federation state that 35% of police officers would fit the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Chances are it's probably a lot higher than that. The number differs depending on what source you look at, but I kind of trust the Police Federation considering, you know, they service and they speak to police officers as part of their data collection. So in a large study of the UK, 40,000 plus police staff reported probable depression, anxiety and PTSD. The cause being exposure to recent trauma doubled the depression and anxiety risk and increased PTSD risk sixfold. So you imagine there's a police officer who starts their shift dealing with something horrendous. They then go to another incident which is also horrendous, and then another incident which is horrendous. And not just police officers, paramedics, frontline NHS staff. See, the people in these jobs don't deal with nice things, and people fucking forget that. Like, I know of an officer personally who was single crewed, which is another massive problem which we're going to get into. An officer that was single crewed attended a report of somebody, like a concern for safety, needing to go make sure someone was okay. Walk in the door and found the guy hanging, still alive, clasping for air. The officer grabbed hold of him, had to support his legs, was shouting on the radio saying, I need help, I need backup. The guy ended up dying in the officer's arms, and the cop then would basically just had to go back to work, you know, or maybe had a day or two off, but he had to go back to work, and over time, like, the cop absolutely crumbled, and he was taken off front line eventually because of the post-traumatic stress of what was caused. The organisation itself don't give a fuck. They don't care, because if they did care, there wouldn't be such a massive drive for getting as many cops out as possible to as many incidents as possible. Regardless of the officer's safety, I know of officers who have been signed off medically with stress or with PTSD or with anxiety or whatever, and then what's happening is, because the radio is busy, they're trying to send those cops out. They're trying to tell the cops that are saying, look, I need help, I need a break from all the crap which you have to shovel through every single day, and they're telling them, yeah, but that doesn't meet the needs of the organisation, so get back out. It's wrong. It's so goddamn wrong. So let's look at some more. Approximately 80% of first responders report experiencing traumatic incidents in their job. Of course, it's part of the job. You're going to deal with nasty, horrible things. But there has to be the aftercare there. There has to be that support there, because all what happens is cops go off sick, which means other cops and other NHS workers, etc., have to basically pick up the slack, pick up the extra demand, which is therefore there due to the officers going off or the paramedics going off or ambulance staff going off. So sick days is a problem. I've got some data on sick days, and it's fucking worrying. Even if the officers don't go off sick, there's a case of burnout. There's something called empathy burnout, and it's not really spoken about enough because it's a proper taboo topic. Like, people don't want to talk about empathy burnout, but it's a serious thing. So if you get somebody who has been to 10, 20 incidents, 10, 20 call outs, and they've had people telling them that they want to hurt themselves, the partner's abusing them, they have just lost a loved one, and all the rest of it, deaths, you name it, anything, the worst things you can imagine possible happening, and some things you probably can't even imagine, there's people out there have to go to every single day and have to deal with that. Over time, due to burnout, due to overworking, due to stress, due to low morale, people go to the incidents, and yes, they put on a front and they nod and they say that they're very sorry and they try to help, but officers get burnt out, people get burnt out. Empathy is not an infinite resource, and we're made to believe that it is. Empathy is something which it does run out, and if people are overworked, then their empathy burns out, meaning they can't give the right service to the people that they are there to look after and protect, which means that officers feel like they're not doing a good job. It just becomes another job, which obviously isn't okay, because this is the worst day of this person's life. And it means that the public aren't getting the best service, and if anything, the public can have a bad experience when it comes to emergency services if they maybe have never contacted the police or the ambulance in their entire lives. And it's wrong. It's so wrong. And how we combat that is, one, by sorting the issue at source much earlier than it gets to the point where the services are called. But we're not doing that currently, because, you know, that would fix the problem. And by the sounds of it, the organisations and the people at the top of the food chain don't want these problems to be fixed for statistics and money, and it's also just a bit difficult to do. So it's like buying a new house and just painting the walls and not getting rid of the rot actually in the foundations. We're not looking after the actual proper problem, we're not tackling the proper issue. So we have that, or if we're unable to sort the issue at source, well then let's support and protect and give the right resources to the people that are there to fix the fucking problem. Another big issue when it comes to policing and it comes to NHS staff and first responders and trauma is second and vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. So you listening to somebody recount something that is absolutely tragic and awful will have an effect on you. You are not invulnerable. You are not a fucking robot, even though the public and the police and the services would expect you to become a robot. It doesn't work like that. We are human beings. We take on other people's trauma. We take on other people's worst events that have happened to their life, even if we've not directly witnessed it. Now, like I said, 80% of people report experiencing traumatic events on the job. That is including the vicarious trauma. Sitting and dealing with cases, going to emergency rooms, traveling in the back of ambulances, attending incidents and listening to something absolutely god-awful what's happened, listening to people's life stories and the events that have led to them ending up in this position right now. Like, I can still remember some of the things people have said to me, so I'm sure there's probably a bit of trauma still there. Plus, you also have the trauma of the officers and the NHS staff, which they have anyway, and it's just like a bucket. It's constantly pouring in that bucket, and unless there's that release valve, this is when people go off sick. This is when people decide that, you know what, I can't do this job anymore. This is when people turn into robots who have no empathy or have very little empathy left to give. It's when officers and NHS staff start self-medicating with alcohol. I believe alcohol is a big problem in the ambulance service, as a friend of mine who's a paramedic has told me recently, because the support is not there. We need to fund more support for the people dealing with the incidents. We need to give them the right tools for the job. We need to give them the right resources, and we'll get on to very soon about what the government's planning on doing and why it's just not going to work, because none of them have ever spent any time actually in uniform or dealing with these kind of incidents. Career politicians who simply read stats and figures and think that they know how the bleeding world works. But it's like poor working conditions, such as lack of colleague support and excessive workloads, too much demand for the amount of people that are required to do it. Like, I don't even want to get into the amount of cops which parade on at any one time, because people will be up in arms. It's really terrifying. But this compounds stress, and it greatly increases the rates of complex PTSD, and like I said, one study found high rates of PTSD or CPTSD in officers, and they felt rarely felt supported. Many frontline staff don't report trauma symptoms due to fear of stigma, lack of confidential services, and belief that showing distress shows weakness. I certainly had that. If I was dealing with an incident or I thought, you know what, that was pretty nasty, that, okay, you have a bit of dark humour and a joke to kind of let the release valve go, but sometimes things do affect you, and it's not weak to say, look, I'm struggling here, I need help. Because like I said, there was the guy who I know who was supporting that guy, trying to save that guy's life who was hanging, who died. He tried carrying on, and he ended up in the fetal position on the floor crying his eyes out. This was an experienced officer with like 15, 20 years experience, who was a pinnacle of strength. I know other officers that have had stuff going on at home, and then they're dealing with all sorts of stuff at work. They just can't get away from the stress, and eventually, you know, they pop. There's officers that have ended their lives due to the stress and the issues, what they have to deal with, the things they have to deal with. In England, the ambulance service has spent 1.8 million hours in 2021 to 2022 dealing with mental health related 999 calls, which is a 24% increase since 2018 and 2019. And I would hate to think what it is now. Unfortunately, the research I've picked up didn't mention what it is now, but 1.8 million hours. How many, the NHS is meant to be there to look after, you know, health, and we're completely forgetting about mental health. And the mental health services are underfunded, they're overstretched, they're not getting the money and the resources and the training and the staff and the quality of staff and the buildings which are supposed to have to properly support people. There's not enough ambulances, and when we talk about this kind of thing where it comes to the amount of hours what NHS staff and the ambulances go to support people with mental health calls, we're completely forgetting about all the calls what the police go to. Like, generally what happens is, if there's a medical emergency or a mental health issue where someone's reporting that they're going to hurt themselves, or as someone told me quite recently, that someone had severely hurt themselves and they were bleeding out on the street, it's not the ambulance what gets there first, guys. Half the time it's the police. The police are the ones who deal with the violence, the disorder, the mental health crisis, the domestic disputes, the burglaries, everything. If you name it, the police are there to deal with it. That's the police are the guys and girls. The police are the service who go and deal with fucking everything, and then other services coming afterwards. So if it's 1.8 million hours for the NHS and ambulance service, I'd fucking hate to think what it's like for the police. And again, it's just more trauma, more issues. And those people who are going to watch this and go, oh well, that's what they signed up for. Yes, they signed up to help people and support people, but that doesn't mean that these people are robots. If we know that that is what the job entails, then there should be more support available for people who are experiencing that sort of thing. And when it comes to stuff like single crewing, that means that people are feeling more vulnerable. They're less likely to do their jobs properly, like pull over cars and stop search people, or they might be a bit more worried about attending an incident on their own because they don't have that support and backup. And it's not just UK either. I had someone from America message me and tell me that's exactly the same. So it's quite blatant, really. The emergency services, which are the very reason why we can sleep in our bed at night, or why we hurt ourselves, or we feel upset, that we can call on for support and help, are so underfunded and are so overlooked by the government. And because it's out of sight, it's out of mind. We just assume that we could always pick up the phone and an ambulance will turn up, or we pick up the phone and a copper will turn up, or the fire service will turn up. Or what happens when we simply don't have that service available? What happens then? NHS 999 call takers are quitting in an alarming numbers. 27% of NHS call takers left over 3 years, averaging 33 sick days per year, far above the UK's average of 4. So, yeah, even your people who are not necessarily going to the incidents themselves, they're still getting the trauma, they're still listening to people screaming at them down the phone, they're still talking to people, and the call takers are the unsung heroes. They are so critical and so important when it comes to a functioning ambulance service and a functioning police service and a functioning emergency service altogether. And we forget about them. We forget about the police staff and the NHS staff who sit there for hours and hours and just listen to the worst things imaginable happening to people, and they are under so much stress to direct people to them, to make sure those people attending have got the right information, and we treat them like utter shit. 33 sick days per year, far above the UK average of 4. One Trust reporting a staggering 80% turnover. So out of every 10 people what they hired, they had to rehire 8 of them. And 54 sick days a year per handler. Per person, we're having over a month off work every year, nearly 6 weeks off every year as a result of over a month off every single year, simply due to the stress and the strain of the job. Scottish Police data reports show that 1 in 10 officers took sick leave due to psychological issues in 2024. Among those taking sick leave, the vast majority cited mental health disorders. 3 officers took their own lives while off duty. 3 cops decided that they were under so much pain, and under so much stress, and not supported properly by the organisation that is there to make sure that they are able to do their job and support other people, were fucking left to stew and to suffer in silence to the point where they ended their lives. It's utterly, utterly reprehensible and utterly disgraceful. Occupational trauma is cumulative. Each incident adds to the emotional burden. Trauma isn't always visible, but it stacks up. And I'd say this to cops where they come to me for coaching, or they read my book, or whatever. When people deal with trauma, it might seem okay at the time. It's later on when you're at home, or it could be weeks or months down the line, and it really starts to play on your mind, and you find you're not sleeping properly, you find your alcohol's going up, you find you're getting more snappy, you find you're losing interest in work, you're finding that you've just got no empathy to give. It's all a result of building up a trauma, and it has to be acknowledged, and has to be acknowledged a lot bleeding better than it currently is. Stigma keeps the crisis hidden. Many avoid seeking help due to fear of career impact. For example, you can't go on firearms if you have any kind of history of mental health. Mental health impact, reflections of weakness and peer judgment. If you go to a colleague and say, I really struggled with that job yesterday, or I'm not sleeping properly, they might tell you to grow up, they might tell you to get over it. Personally, I've had it on both sides. I've had some colleagues say, what the fuck are you talking about? Deal with it, get on with it. You're a copper, shit happens, get on with it. There's a place for that, I suppose. But then there's also managers who have said, okay, look, let's go in the back room and let's have a chat properly about it. I've had instances where, I have been struggling when I've dealt with something, and I've gone to speak to somebody who is there to help and support you, and they've been too busy on the pissing computer to even lift their head up properly to talk to you about it properly. Work environment matters. Trauma exposure isn't the only factor. Poor support, unpredictable shifts. The shift work alone means that you're more susceptible to poor mental health, poor diet, poor exercise, everything else, and burnout and stress. Working all kinds of hours, your body, your circadian rhythm, your sleep, it all impacts you and adds up and adds over to sick leave, etc. Call handler strain is rising. Those behind the 999 calls face relentless emotional exposure because you're listening to, as it's happening, you're listening to the raw, unfiltered emotion, leading to high turnover and sick leave. Mental health support, I could go on, guys. I could go on so much. Suicide and self-harm are real threats. People wanting to end their lives and self-harm are real threats. Elevated rate of ideation and attempts among responders should be met with urgent preventative action. 100% agree with that. The bottom line is people just are not being supported. System level reform is overdue. We are still working with the same model that we did 20, 30 years ago when we didn't understand as much about mental health. The world has changed in 20, 30 years and we are still operating the same systems. Not only that, when we talk about the same systems, chances are the computer's got more service than you when you go in because the equipment which you have is absolutely it's archaic a lot of the time. The systems don't work. your job's just made harder because of the level of hoops, what you have to go through, level of red tape. Just God creating a prosecution file is enough to make somebody quit alone. So even doing the job itself is an absolute nightmare and just adds to stress because of the systems, the procedures and everything else in place just to, you know, get a little bit further ahead. Police are being burnt out and the turnover rate is insane. And what's going to happen one day is, I'm really afraid of this, is one day you're going to pick up the phone and call the police for help, and there's just going to be no one there to support you. And not only that, it means that those cops that are going out dealing to incidents are going to get more burnt out, more stressed, more traumatized. Officer safety is a massive problem. Officers are being told to go out single crewed, even on night shifts, because they want to get the list down. They want to get the amount of calls which are coming through down. So the bosses are prioritizing the stats and statistics of how the force looks over the officer safety. It's completely backwards. They need to prioritise the officer safety, make sure that cops can go and do a proper job and do a better job and feel more secure and safe while doing their job, rather than just fucking get as many cops out to as many incidents as possible, half-arse them before being dragged along to somewhere else. Some cops tell me that they don't even eat or drink on an entire shift because they just don't have time. They don't have time to eat. They don't get a lunch hour. They don't get a break. It's, if you can find half an hour in your shift where it's a little bit queue, I imagine the ambulance service is the same, then you will try and ram something down your neck as quick as you can before you get pulled off your dinner or your food, or you just having a goddamn minute because your feet aren't touching the ground. Real issue in the police is work stress, repeat incidents and more. Yeah, and I mentioned a lot of this already, guys. Another one is lack of autonomy. People are being told in the services now you have to make certain decisions whether you agree with them or not, such as locking up people in order to take positive action, because that's just the ethos which is currently happening right now, and it's statistics-based policing and everything else. So that is a massive problem because it stops people being able to make their own decisions and being autonomous and having actual autonomy and a sense of purpose over their work. The easiest way to demoralize your staff is to make them feel like they don't matter. And even when it comes to like the professional standards, they just seem to be so punitive on people at the minute because they're so terrified of anything bad happening. They are diving all over cops, and like I said, I don't know what the NHS is like with it, but diving all over cops when they step a foot out of line. I've even had officers message me saying that they are actively, preemptively leaving the service because of how overzealous the professional standards department is. So I had a cop message me the other day who's got 6 years service. They then said, 6 years service in, I'm leaving because I'm terrified of doing something wrong, making a decision or an incident going tits up, that I then end up getting sacked, and then as a result of me getting sacked, I then have a gross misconduct label on my employment record, which means I can't get another job. So because of the awful situation the police are in, because of the lack of autonomy, and because of the stress and workload and trauma and lack of mental health support and overworking and shifts and everything else, like, people are leaving, they're actively jumping ship prior to it getting to breaking point or them being dismissed because they're terrified of that happening, because they just don't feel supported. They just do not feel supported. It's as simple as that. In 2025 and 26, an extra £376.8 million has been allocated to maintain police officer numbers, with 100 million specifically earmarked for boosting neighbourhood policing roles. That all sounds really, really good, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work because what we're doing is we're just throwing money at the problem rather than fixing the problem as to why are cops leaving, why aren't cops staying, why are people going off sick so much, why is demand so high. What are the actual mechanics of a cop doing the job, such as preparing a prosecution file, etc., having the autonomy over their work, them being able to make their own decisions. Like, we're just throwing people at the problem without fixing the problem, which is why people are fucking leaving in the first place. So it's like I said, it's painting the wall of a new house rather than sorting out the foundations of it. Critics argue that the focus on the numbers, 20,000 police officer uplift, 13,000 neighbourhood roles, misses the deeper issues surrounding retention, morale and competence, which is, like I said, what I've just said. As March 2025, so recently, March 2025, overall police numbers fell by 1,300 officers. Some were dismissed, but the majority of them were resignations, while new recruits dropped by 17%. So we are record amount losing officers, and we are unable to recruit new officers, which is why we're seeing such terrible officers being recruited, which is why we're getting rid of the fitness test, which is why we're getting rid of the final interview process, which is why training's rushed, which is why we're hearing of officers who need emotional support snails, officers who, when they do the fitness test, they can't pass it, but they get put through anyway, officers that can barely speak English or barely read or write English, officers that are, you know, power hungry and abusive. We're not hiring the right people, all in an attempt to keep the service running, because by the sounds of it, we'd rather have terrible officers than proper officers, and it's fucking disgusting. So, in reality, the police still respond to the mental health incidents, like I mentioned, despite lacking training support or clinical support. Police officers are not mental health first aider trained. They're not trained in it. They have maybe like an hour or a day of mental health training. Like, police aren't there to solve mental health cases. They're there to catch criminals and to detect crime and sort crime out. But because the ambulance service is in an utter state of disrepair, it falls on the police. And it's not okay, because then that's more trauma and more stress and more issues what the police have to deal with. And this all goes down to us. Like, we're the ones who will suffer. If there's no police or ambulance or fire service, society's fucked. The system's completely fucked, and it's wrong. There's little strategic investment in addressing social care causes of emergency services demand. So like I said, what is the actual root cause of the problem? Poverty, addiction, adverse childhood experiences, housing, trauma, meaning services remain overwhelmed by problems they are not designed to solve. We are trying to throw cops and NHS resources at a system and a society which is ultimately not working properly. And the reason why it's not working properly is because we are ignoring the problem, because it's difficult to sort and it's difficult to solve and it's difficult to fix. We would rather let society keep going the way it's going, public unrest, issues in social housing, domestic abuse, childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, which then create problematic sources and issues for the police to then deal with later on down the line, and we can't even hire the right police officers to deal with that. So the entire system currently is a complete fucking mess, and it's utterly disgusting and awful what's happening. And you know what, I really do hope that somebody gets in government soon, or somebody goes, you know what, maybe I won't be re-elected for this, but this is a serious issue what we need to solve. Rather than politicians focusing on themselves and looking at their own careers and whether they get re-elected or not, they actually do what they're supposed to do, and that is try and fix society and fix the problems which society is facing. So guys, that is everything from me. If you want to know more about what I think and support me, then you can check out my best-selling book, The Job's Fuck Secret Dive of Police Officer, available now on Amazon. But this was not about that at all. This was just me getting on and just highlighting the absolute state of disrepair. It's just fallen over. The absolute state of disrepair which the country is currently in. It's the shit what people won't tell you. It's the stuff what the government don't want you to know. And this is why I'm here. Not only to highlight the issues facing the emergency services, but to explain that it does affect all of us, whether you like the police or not, or the NHS or whatever. It does affect all of us. It's a serious, serious issue. And the problem is just simply getting worse. It's not getting any better, and the problem, unless sorted, will continue to get worse. And there will come that day where we pick up the phone to call the NHS or to call 999 or call the police, and there is no one there to come and help us. And I hope to God that day doesn't come, but unfortunately it's going to come sooner rather than we think, unless something quite drastic happens. So the purpose of my channel is to raise awareness and to support cops and support ambulance service, NHS, and the emergency service as a whole. Some people like it. Some people want me to sit here and talk shit about the emergency services. I'm not going to do that. I'll critique the organisation when it needs it, but my main thing is to say cops do a very hard fucking job. Ambulance services do a hard fucking job. An impossible job, I would even go as far to say. And they really don't get enough credit, enough support at all. So if you enjoy this conversation, if you enjoy this sort of thing, if you like these kind of rants, and by all means let me know in the comments. Please subscribe, it helps the channel. Order the book if you want to support me, or join my Patreon, or fucking just subscribe. It costs you nothing and it makes the channel grow and gets bigger. So anyway, have a great day. Cheers.